Shut up and come with me fast. Those were the desperate words that Lola whispered to her boss that night. He had just closed the biggest contract of his life, but upon opening his front door, she yanked him inside with tears in her eyes. Your wife is in the living room, signing the divorce papers. 15 years of marriage. 15 years that were about to end in 3 signatures. And Lola knew, because she made the same mistake 30 years ago. She told her husband to leave, and he never came back. Now she had 10 minutes to save what she couldn't save. Like this, if it touched your soul, it's more than a click. It's a silent embrace between those of us who know what it's like to almost lose everything. Comment on how you think this story is going to end, and if you haven't subscribed yet, it costs you nothing, but for us, it means the entire world. Thank you for being here. The key turned in the lock. Robert Miller was coming from closing the biggest contract of his life. $42 million after 3 years of negotiations. He carried the briefcase Evelyn gave him on their 10th anniversary and a phone hot with congratulatory calls, but the door had barely opened when a hand yanked him inside. "Shut up. Come with me fast," whispered Lola, his housekeeper, covering his mouth. She dragged him to the kitchen pantry. There, trembling and crying, she revealed the truth. She's in the living room, with the lawyer, signing the divorce. Robert felt the floor disappear beneath his feet. 15 years of marriage, divorce. "I've seen everything for 3 years, Lola continued through tears. "Dinners ending up in the trash because you never arrive. Nights she sleeps on the sofa waiting for you. I've heard her rehearse conversations in front of the mirror, searching for the courage to talk to you, but you're always too tired or checking your phone." Every word was a direct hit. Robert leaned against the shelves. 3 weeks ago, I found her crying at 3 in the morning. She told me, "I don't even miss him anymore, Lola. That's what hurts the most, that his absence no longer hurts me." "Why didn't you tell me anything?" he asked, his voice broken. "Because it wasn't my place. But tonight, I can't keep quiet. If you go in unprepared, you'll destroy the last chance." Lola took a deep breath. "I was married 12 years. In one stupid argument, I told my husband to leave if he wasn't happy. He left and never came back. He died 2 years later. I was left with the remorse of having let pride destroy everything." Robert closed his eyes. His professional empire was fading before something much more important. "What do I do?" "You have 10 minutes before she signs. You are going to go in, you are going to see your wife in front of the lawyer, and you are going to do something you have never done. Shut up. Listen, without defending yourself, without justifying yourself. Listen to every word as if your life depended on it, because it does." Robert took a deep breath and left the pantry. His steps echoed in the hallway like sentences. Upon reaching the archway to the living room, he stopped. Evelyn was sitting on the beige sofa, wearing a navy dress he didn't remember ever seeing her wear. Across from her, Dr. Harrison, a 50-year-old man in a grey suit, was reviewing documents on the coffee table. The pen rested in Evelyn's right hand, suspended over the paper. "Evelyn," Robert said in a soft voice. She looked up abruptly. Her face paled. Her eyes, those green eyes he loved, filled with a mixture of surprise and pain. "What are you doing here?" she whispered. "You were due tomorrow." "I moved the flight up." Robert entered slowly. "I haven't come to stop you from anything. I've come to listen to you." Dr. Harrison cleared his throat uncomfortably. "Mr. Miller, perhaps we should—" "No," Evelyn interrupted firmly, though her voice trembled. "If he wants to stay, let him stay. But this changes nothing." Robert sat in the armchair, maintaining distance. Lola appeared in the doorway but remained silent, watching. "Say what you need to say," Robert asked. "I promise I will only listen." Evelyn put the pen down on the table and brought her hands to her face. When she spoke, her voice was a river held back for too long. 15 years, Robert. 15 years waiting for you to come home. Not physically, because I know you work hard. Waiting for you to come back to me, to ask me how my day was, to notice when I changed, my hair color, or when I cried silently next to you in bed. The tears began to roll down her cheeks. "Do you know how many dinners I prepared with excitement these last 5 years? 173. I counted them. 173 times I set the table, lit candles, got dressed up, hoping that maybe that night would be different. And all 173 ended up in the trash or the refrigerator, cold and forgotten." Robert felt his throat constrict, but he kept his promise. He only listened. But the worst wasn't that, Evelyn continued. The worst was the day I realized it no longer hurt. That seeing your empty side of the bed no longer made me sad, but relieved. Because living alone is less painful than living with someone who is absent. Dr. Harrison looked down at his documents, clearly uncomfortable with the intimacy of the scene. I tried to talk to you. God knows I tried. But you were always on an important call or checking urgent emails or too tired. And I stopped trying, I gave up. And when a woman gives up on her marriage, Robert, there's no turning back. Or so I thought. Evelyn picked up the pen again but didn't sign. She only held it, as if it weighed tons. Do you know what the saddest thing is? That I know you love me. I never doubted that. But love without presence is just a beautiful word. And I got tired of living off beautiful words. The silence that followed was dense, loaded with 15 years of emotional neglect. Robert felt tears rolling down his own face, something that hadn't happened since his father's death 10 years ago. Can I speak now? He asked with a broken voice. Evelyn nodded slowly. You're right. About everything. Robert leaned forward, his hands trembling. I built an empire out of ego, not for us. I thought giving you financial security was enough, that providing was loving you, and I was an idiot. He wiped his tears without shame. I have no excuses. Not one. I chose meetings over you. I chose contracts over us. I chose professional success over the only success that truly matters, making you happy. And now, sitting here, looking at those papers, I realize I lost everything while I thought I was gaining everything. Evelyn stared at him, her eyes red. I'm not asking you not to sign, Robert continued. I don't have that right. If you decide to sign, I will respect it. But I need you to know that I finally understood, that if you give me a chance, it won't be to go back to being the same. It will be to become the man you deserved from the beginning. Evelyn looked at the documents on the table, 3 pages that would legally end 15 years of history. Her hand was shaking, holding the pen. Do you know what day today is? She asked without looking up. Robert shook his head, feeling miserably ignorant. Exactly 7 years ago today, on this same date, I had a miscarriage. I was 12 weeks along. You were in Frankfurt closing a contract. I called you crying. From the hospital. You told me you would take the first flight. You never arrived. You showed up 3 days later with flowers and apologies. Robert felt something break inside his chest. He hadn't forgotten it, but he had filed it away in some dark corner of his mind, labeled as past overcome. That night I decided I would never emotionally depend on you again, that I would build walls so high your absence couldn't hurt me. And it worked. For 7 years it worked. Until I realized that living behind walls isn't living. She raised the pen. Dr. Harrison cleared his throat, preparing his notary presence. But then Evelyn looked at Robert. She really looked at him, and she saw something she hadn't seen in years, genuine vulnerability. Not the calculating businessman who had an answer for everything, not the successful entrepreneur who never showed weakness. She saw the man she had fallen in love with 20 years ago, when they were both college students with no money but infinite time for each other. In these last 10 minutes, Evelyn said with a trembling voice, I saw the man I married, not the one he became afterward. With a sudden movement, she ripped the documents in half. Dr. Harrison gasped. Mrs. Miller, legally we need— There's not going to be a divorce, Dr. Harrison, Evelyn interrupted firmly. At least not today. Robert stood up, driven by hope. But Evelyn raised a hand, stopping him. Listen to me carefully, Robert. Ripping up this paper doesn't erase 15 years. It doesn't mean everything is forgiven or that we'll go back to what we were. It means I'm willing to give you a chance to build something new, but with non-negotiable conditions. Whatever they are, he responded without hesitation. Couples therapy. We start next week and you don't miss a single session. Evelyn counted on her fingers. You reduce your workload by 50%. Delegate, hire, do whatever you have to do, but your life can no longer be just the company. And, third, I have the right to be myself again. Not just your wife. I'm going to take back things I gave up waiting for you. I'm going to live again. I accept everything, Robert said. Everything. Lola, who had remained silent, slowly approached. Her face showed a mix of relief and nostalgic pain. You did what I didn't have the courage to do, she said softly. That's why I stopped you. Because I saw in you the second chance I never had. Evelyn stood up and hugged Lola, who finally allowed herself to cry openly. "Thank you," Evelyn whispered, "for having the courage that I lacked." Dr. Harrison packed his documents, clearly relieved not to have to process a divorce that night. "My services are no longer needed, I see. I wish you the best." When the lawyer left, the three remained in the living room. The clock struck 11 o'clock at night. Outside, New York slept unaware of the small miracle that had just happened in that apartment. "And now what?" Robert asked, almost afraid to break the moment. "Now we start from scratch," Evelyn replied, "like it's our first date, getting to know each other again." 3 days later, Robert and Evelyn walked into Dr. Patricia Mendez's office in Boston. They had traveled early, on a train that ran along the coast. During the journey, they spoke little, but Robert noticed that Evelyn didn't pull her hand away when he took it. The office was bright, with cream-colored walls and plants in every corner. Dr. Mendez, a 60-year-old woman with silver hair pulled back in a loose bun, greeted them with professional warmth. "Sit wherever you feel comfortable," she indicated. Evelyn chose the left end of the sofa. Robert sat on the right end, leaving visible space between them. The doctor noticed but didn't comment. "Who wants to start?" "I do," Evelyn said. 3 days ago I was about to sign the divorce papers. My husband arrived unexpectedly. For the first time in years, he listened, really listened. And now we are here because I want to believe. It's possible to rebuild, but I don't know if I can." "You don't know if you can forgive?" the doctor asked. "I don't know if I can trust again," Evelyn corrected. "Forgiveness is a decision. Trust is built with consistent actions over time." Dr. Mendez nodded and looked at Robert. "And what are you looking for in this therapy?" "To learn how to be a husband again," he replied. "Or maybe for the first time in reality. Because being a provider is not the same as being a partner." During the next hour, the therapist guided them through uncomfortable questions. When did the relationship stop being a priority? What emotional needs were left unsatisfied? What did success truly mean to each of them? Robert admitted that he had used work as an escape from emotional intimacy, that it was easier to solve business crises than to face deep conversations with his wife. Evelyn confessed that she had stopped communicating her needs because she assumed they didn't matter, that she had become an expert at not bothering, not asking, at disappearing. "Marriage is like a vase," Dr. Mendez explained, taking a glass flower vase from her desk. "When it breaks, cracks remain. You can glue it back together, and if you do it well, the vase can hold water again. It can even become stronger in the repaired joins. But the scars remain. They always remain. The question is, are you willing to love a vase with scars?" Evelyn looked at the vase for a long time. "Yes," she finally said, "if he is willing to hold it." "Carefully." "I will be," Robert promised. Leaving the session, they walked aimlessly through the streets of Boston. The March sun was warming gently. Robert noticed how Evelyn was looking at the shop windows, something she used to do when they were dating. "Are you hungry?" he asked. "Always," she replied with a half-smile. "I know a place, if it still exists." They took the subway to the neighborhood where they had their first date 20 years ago. The small cafe, the corner spot, was still there, miraculously intact. They went in and sat at the same corner table. Robert ordered 2 lattes and toast, exactly what they had ordered that first time. "You remember?" Evelyn asked, surprised. "I remember every detail of that day," he replied. "You were wearing a yellow blouse. You laughed so hard you spit out your coffee. You told me about your dream of being an architect, and I thought, this woman is my future." "And what happened to that woman?" Evelyn asked sadly. "I left her alone," Robert admitted, "but I want to help her come back." 2 weeks later, at 10 o'clock at night, Robert's phone rang. It was Wei Chen, his contact in Shanghai. A billionaire client wanted to close a $17 million contract, but demanded to meet in Singapore the next day. The flight was leaving from Chicago in 18 hours. Robert looked at Evelyn, who was reading on the sofa. For the first time in his career, he didn't make the decision alone. "It's about the Singapore contract," he said, closing the phone without answering. "They want me to travel tomorrow. I would be out for 48 hours. Evelyn slowly put down the book. "And what are you going to do?" "I don't know," he admitted. "That's why I'm asking you." She looked at him for a long time, assessing the sincerity in his eyes. "What would you have done a month ago?" "I would have packed without telling you," he replied honestly. Evelyn nodded, appreciating the brutal honesty. "That's a lot of money," she said. "And to know it's important for the company. You are more important. It's not about choosing between work and me, Robert. It's about balance. Evelyn got up and walked toward him. You can go, but you come back in exactly 48 hours, not 1 hour more. If you don't return on time, I sign the divorce papers. That's an ultimatum, he observed. It's a boundary, she corrected, and I need to know you will respect them. Robert accepted. He took the first flight to Chicago the next day. In the kitchen, Lola was preparing breakfast when Evelyn came downstairs. Did you do the right thing letting him go? Evelyn asked. Rebuilding is not about being perfect, Lola replied, serving coffee. It's about trying. He is trying. And so are you. In Singapore, the meeting was going well until CEO Wang announced that they needed 3 more days of negotiations. I'm sorry, Robert said firmly. I have an unmissable commitment in 48 hours. Either we close in 6 hours or I will have to decline. Wang frowned, clearly unaccustomed to being told no. A commitment more important than $17 million. My marriage, Robert replied without blinking. And yes, it is more important. Wang looked at him in silence for 5 seconds. Then he smiled. A man who values his family values loyalty. Let's close the contract now. They signed in 2 hours. Robert rushed to the airport with plenty of time, but at the boarding gate, an announcement froze his blood. Technical problem. 4-hour delay. He would arrive 2 hours late. Robert called Evelyn with trembling hands. Honey, there's a technical problem. The flight was delayed 4 hours. I will arrive 2 hours late of the deadline. I swear I did everything. I know. Evelyn interrupted with a calm voice. It's not your fault. Then, you're not going to... I didn't say that. I said it's not your fault. But the promise was 48 hours. I need to think. She hung up. Robert sat in the waiting area, feeling completely powerless. He had closed the contract in record time, had done everything humanly possible, and still, he would be late. In New York, Evelyn hung up the phone and stared at it. Lola entered the dining room. What are you going to do? I don't know, Evelyn admitted. I know he did everything he could, but I need him to understand that my time is valuable too. Intention matters, Lola said softly. A month ago, he would have extended the trip without consulting you. Today, he rejected. Money to return on time. The outcome didn't change his intention. Evelyn took a deep breath. Did you forgive him? Your husband, before he died. Lola shook her head sadly. I never had the chance. He died before I could tell him I had been a foolish, proud woman. Don't make my mistake. Evelyn made a decision. She grabbed the car keys. Where are you going? Lola asked. To the airport. If he did the impossible to meet the deadline, I can do the impossible to receive him. She drove to JFK. Airport. She looked for flight information. It would land in 90 minutes. She bought a large piece of cardboard and a marker at an airport store. In large letters, she wrote, Welcome to the rest of our life. When the flight landed, Robert ran out of the terminal. He practically crashed into the automatic doors. His eyes desperately searched for a taxi, and then he saw her. Evelyn was next to the arrivals exit, holding the sign. She was wearing the blue dress he loved. Her loose hair shone under the airport lights. Robert stopped dead in his tracks. Tears began to roll down his face uncontrollably. He walked slowly toward her. Evelyn dropped the sign and hugged him. You're late, she whispered, but you tried with all your heart to be on time, and that's what matters. I thought I had lost everything again, he said with a broken voice. Almost, she admitted, but someone very wise reminded me that intentions matter more than results. They kissed in the middle of the airport, oblivious to the curious glances of passers-by. It was the first real connected present kiss they had shared in years. They returned home together. Lola was waiting up for them with hot tea. All good? She asked with a knowing smile. All good, Evelyn confirmed. 3 months later, Robert's life had changed radically. He implemented revolutionary policies in his company, flexible hours, a ban on emails after 6 in the evening, subsidized family therapy for all employees. His executive team looked at him as if he had lost his mind. Robert, these policies will reduce productivity, argued his VP, Mark. They will reduce burnout, Robert corrected. A well-rested, happy employee is more productive than an exhausted and resentful one. And if we lose contracts for having human boundaries, then they weren't contracts we deserved. He called a general company meeting. 200 employees gathered in the auditorium. Robert stepped onto the stage without notes or a presentation. Just his. "Truth. 3 months ago I was about to lose my wife," he began. "Not because I was unfaithful, not because I was cruel, but because I was absent, because I thought providing was loving. That working 60 hours a week was being a good husband. I was wrong." The auditorium was in complete silence. "How many of you have missed your children's birthdays by being at the office?" Robert asked. Several hands were raised timidly. "How many have fought with your partners because you're always too tired to talk?" More hands. "How many have forgotten what it feels like to have a hobby?" Almost everyone raised a hand. "Well, that ends today," Robert declared, "because I built this company to improve our lives, not to destroy them. And if I have to reduce profits to increase humanity, I will do it without a second thought." He announced the new policies: maximum 8-hour days, optional remote work, work-life balance workshops, and the creation of a new position, Family Wellness Coordinator. "And the person who saved my marriage, the person who had the courage to stop me when I was about to lose everything, will be the one to lead this initiative. Lola Rodriguez, please come forward." Lola, sitting in the back row, turned pale. Evelyn, next to her, gave her a gentle, encouraging push. She walked onto the stage, trembling. "Lola worked in my house for 3 years," Robert explained. "She saw my negligence firsthand, and at the most crucial moment, she had the courage to intervene, to tell me truths no one else dared to say. Her salary will be tripled. Her mission will be to help other families not make my mistakes." The auditorium erupted in applause. Lola cried openly. After the meeting, several employees approached Robert with tears in their eyes, thanking him for finally putting people before profits. 2 weeks later, Evelyn received a package in the mail. Inside were enrollment documents for Columbia University, resuming the architecture degree she had abandoned 12 years ago. "You did this?" she asked Robert. "I contacted the university," he admitted, "explaining your situation. They are willing to validate your previous credits. You can finish in 2 years. Evelyn looked at the papers with moist eyes. "Classes are at night, 3 times a week. I know. I rearranged my entire schedule. On those nights, I will arrive by 5. We will have dinner together before you leave, and I will be awake when you get back, so you can tell me everything." Evelyn hugged him tightly. "Thank you for giving me back my dreams." The first night of class, Robert arrived punctually at 5. They had prepared pasta together, laughing when he burned the garlic. Evelyn got ready with the nervousness of a first-time student. "What if I'm too old for this?" she asked in front of the mirror. "Dreams don't have an expiration date," Robert replied, clasping the necklace he had given her on their first anniversary. When she left, Robert didn't turn on the television or open his laptop. He simply sat on the terrace with a book, waiting for her. Evelyn returned at 11, her eyes bright with excitement. "It was incredible," she said, dropping her backpack. "We talked about sustainable design, about emotional architecture. I felt alive, Robert. I felt like myself again." "Tell me everything," he asked, and he truly listened to every word. Lola, in her new role, began implementing programs in the company. She organized workshops on couple communication, family digital disconnection, sessions, and created a support group for employees struggling with work-life balance. One afternoon, an employee named David sought her out in tears. "My wife gave me an ultimatum," he confessed. "Change or she leaves." Lola sat him down in her office and told him her own story. Complete, uncensored. "I told my husband to leave, and I lost him forever. Don't let pride or work destroy what really matters." David listened, cried, and finally decided to take temporary leave to reconnect with his family. With Dr. Mendez, the sessions became deeper. The therapist guided them through painful but necessary territory. "Robert, why do you think you used work as an escape?" He took a moment to answer. "My father was a professional failure," he finally said. "Good man, but he never achieved financial stability. My mother practically raised us alone. I promised I would be different, that my family would never be in need. But in the process, you abandoned them emotionally," the doctor pointed out. "Yes, I repeated the pattern I swore to break, just in a different way." Evelyn took his hand. "Evelyn," the therapist continued, "why did you stop communicating your needs? Because my mother was always the perfect wife, she replied. She never complained, she never asked. She always smiled, and she died unhappy, as I discovered from her diary. I didn't want to be her, but I became her. You both brought family wounds into your marriage, Dr. Mendez observed. But now you have the opportunity to heal them together instead of replicating them. They began reconnection exercises, 5 minutes daily of conversation without interruptions or devices, mandatory weekly dates, handwritten love letters. Robert discovered he had forgotten how to be romantic. His first attempts were clumsy, hastily bought flowers, reservations at overly formal restaurants. But Evelyn appreciated the effort more than the result. One night, he prepared a disastrous dinner: burnt chicken, overly salty salad, a last-minute store-bought dessert. "It's awful," Robert admitted with embarrassment. "It's perfect," Evelyn said, laughing, "because you made it, with your hands, for me." They ate the burnt chicken between laughs, and Evelyn felt more love in that imperfect dinner than in years of expensive restaurants. But not everything was linear progress. 6 months after the divorce incident, Robert had a relapse. One Friday night, Evelyn was waiting to go to the movies. They had planned the outing a week in advance. At 7, he hadn't arrived. At 8, he still hadn't shown up. At 9, Evelyn turned off the lights and went to sleep. Robert arrived at 11, finding the house dark and silent. He went up to the bedroom. Evelyn was awake, staring at the ceiling. "I'm sorry," he began. "There was a crisis with—" "I don't want to hear the excuse," she interrupted with a flat voice. "Did you call to say you would be late?" "I didn't have time." "Lie. You had time. You simply let work become more important than telling me." Robert felt the old defensiveness rise. "Evelyn, I run a company. There will be emergencies. And you have a phone. There will be seconds to send a text." She sat up. "This is exactly what you promised not to do again. It was one time, only once in 6 months. And does that make it acceptable?" Evelyn got out of bed. "I'm sleeping in the guest room tonight." "Evelyn, don't overreact." She stopped at the door and looked at him with hard eyes. "If I hear, 'Don't overreact again when I express a valid feeling,' I'm signing the divorce papers tomorrow. Good night." Robert was left alone in the room, feeling the weight of his mistake. The next morning, Lola found him in the kitchen, with deep, dark circles under his eyes. "What happened?" He told her everything. "You failed," she said simply, "and now you have to fix it." "How?" "By being accountable without excuses, without minimizing your mistake, without expecting her to forgive you immediately." Robert knocked on the guest room door. Evelyn opened it, her eyes red. "You're right," he said without preamble. "I had time to tell you. I chose not to, because work absorbed me again. It wasn't an emergency. It was comfort, falling back into old patterns. And I am deeply sorry." Evelyn looked at him in silence. "I don't expect you to forgive me now," he continued, "but I want you to know that I am going to Dr. Mendez today, alone, to work on why I relapsed." "You'll do that?" "I already made the appointment. It's at 3. Evelyn nodded slowly. "All right, but Robert, the next time you relapse, there won't be a third chance." "I know." In the individual session, Dr. Mendez was direct. "Why did you relapse?" "Because it's easier," Robert admitted. "Being the successful CEO is comfortable. It's a role I know. Being the present husband requires constant vulnerability, and it scares me." "What specifically scares you?" "Failing. That I won't be enough. That Evelyn will realize she deserves better." "So you chose to fail in a controlled way," the doctor observed. "Better to go back to work where you feel competent than risk intimacy where you might feel inadequate." Robert was silent, processing the uncomfortable truth. "How do I change that?" "By being vulnerable anyway. By accepting that you will feel inadequate sometimes, and doing it regardless." That night, Robert arrived home at 6. Evelyn was studying. "Can I talk to you?" he asked timidly. She set her books aside. "The doctor, help me understand something," he began. "I'm scared that I'm not enough for you, that you'll discover that the successful businessman is just a mask, and underneath there's just an insecure guy who doesn't know how to be romantic, who forgets important dates, who doesn't understand your emotional needs half the time." Evelyn listened with absolute attention. "And when I feel that way, I go back to work because there I know who I am. I know how to solve problems. I know how to succeed. But with you, With you I feel clumsy, like I'm learning a new language at 42. Robert wiped away the tears that were starting to form. But the doctor told me something that hit me hard, that I chose to fail in a controlled way. Better to disappoint by working too much, something I already know, than to risk true intimacy where I might feel completely inadequate. And she's right. Last night I chose family cowardice instead of unknown courage. Evelyn got up from the sofa and sat next to him for the first time since the previous night. "Do you know what made me fall in love with you 20 years ago?" she asked softly. "It wasn't your ambition. It wasn't your professional determination. It was that you took me to a park on a rainy Sunday because you knew I loved grey days, and we got completely soaked and you laughed like a kid. That vulnerable, authentic, imperfect man. That's the man I fell in love with. I don't know if I still know how to be that man," Robert admitted. "Then let's learn together," Evelyn said, taking his hand. "Because I also don't know how to be the woman I stopped being, but we can discover each other again. With fear, with mistakes, but together." They hugged in silence, an embrace that was promise and forgiveness simultaneously. Lola, who had heard from the kitchen, smiled to herself while preparing tea. She knew the road would be long, but she also knew that these two people were finally walking it for real. The following months brought a silent but profound transformation. Robert began documenting his process in a journal that Dr. Mendez had suggested he keep. Every night before going to sleep, he wrote 3 things: a moment when he had been truly present that day, a difficult emotion he had felt, and one way he could improve the next day. Evelyn, for her part, flourished in her studies. Her end-of-semester project was to design a housing complex that integrated communal spaces with individual privacy, a concept her professor described as architecture of reconnection. She spent hours at her desk, with blueprints spread out and colored pencils, and Robert learned to simply sit nearby, reading his own book, sharing the comfortable silence of 2 people who don't need to fill every moment with words. One October afternoon, while Evelyn was working on her designs, the house phone rang. It was Robert's mother, Eleanor, calling from Miami. "Son, your Aunt Martha is very sick. The doctors say she has weeks, maybe days. She wants to see you." Robert felt a knot in his throat. Aunt Martha had been like a second mother to him, especially after his father died when he was 18. "I'm coming," he said without hesitation. He hung up and looked at Evelyn, who had stopped drawing and was watching him with concern. "It's your aunt, isn't it? I heard part of the conversation." He nodded, feeling tears threatening to come out. "Go," Evelyn said, getting up and approaching him. "And I'm going with you. But you have your project presentation next week. And I have a husband who needs support now," she interrupted firmly. "The project can wait. You can't go through this alone." That decision, simple but significant, showed Robert how much their relationship had changed. A year ago, he would have gone alone without even considering inviting her. Now she chose to accompany him without him having to ask. They traveled to Miami the next day. Lola stayed to look after the house and promised to feed Felix, the stray. Cat Evelyn had adopted 3 months earlier, another sign of her personal rebirth. Aunt Martha was in her small house by the sea, in a hospital bed set up in the living room so she could see the Atlantic Ocean through the window. She was 78 years old, her hair completely white and her hands stained with age, but her eyes still shone with that spark of humor Robert remembered from his childhood. "Look who it is," Martha said with a weak but warm voice when she saw them enter. "The great businessman and his beautiful wife. I thought you had forgotten the way to Miami." "Never, Aunt," Robert said, kissing her wrinkled forehead. "I could never forget you." "Charming liar," she laughed, although the laughter turned into a cough. "But I forgive you. Evelyn, dear, come here. Let me get a good look at you." Evelyn approached and Martha took her hand with surprising strength. "You look different," the old woman observed. "Lighter, as if a weight has been lifted from your shoulders." I lifted. "It myself," Evelyn replied with a smile. "With a little help." Martha looked at Robert with penetrating eyes. "Did you finally wake up, boy?" "Almost too late," he admitted. "But yes." During the next 4 days, Robert and Evelyn stayed in Miami. In the mornings they visited Martha, who told them stories of when Robert was a child, how he had cried for 3 days when his goldfish died, how he had sold lemonade to buy his mother a necklace on Mother's Day, how he had sworn he would marry the first girl who kissed him, a promise he didn't keep to everyone's relief since that girl had been his second cousin. "You were a child with a huge heart," Martha said one afternoon. "So sensitive, so open. When did you close yourself off, Robert?" He thought carefully before answering. "When Dad died, I think. I decided feelings were weakness, that crying was losing control, that the only way to protect Mom and be the man of the family was to become tough." "What nonsense," Martha said bluntly. "Your father was the most emotional man I ever knew. He cried watching sappy movies, remember? And that didn't make him weak. It made him human." Evelyn squeezed Robert's hand discreetly. They were discovering together the roots of the patterns that almost destroyed their marriage. "My biggest mistake," Martha continued, now with a weaker voice, "was not telling you this when you were a teenager. Building walls doesn't make you strong. It makes you lonely. True strength is keeping your heart open even when it hurts." That night, in the small hotel by the port where they were staying, Robert cried in Evelyn's arms. He cried for his father, for the lost years, for the sensitive child he had buried under layers of ambition and control, and Evelyn simply held him without saying anything, because sometimes loving silence is the best comfort. Aunt Martha died peacefully 3 days later at dawn, with the window open so the sea breeze could come in. Robert was holding her hand when she breathed her last. Instead of closing his heart to the pain as he would have before, he allowed himself to feel it completely. And he discovered that Evelyn was right. Feeling the pain completely was the only way to truly honor the love. The funeral was small and intimate. During the service, Robert gave an impromptu speech that surprised everyone present, including his mother. "My Aunt Martha taught me something crucial in her final days, that I had confused strength with insensitivity. That building an empire means nothing if you build walls around your heart." She lived 88 years with her heart wide open, loving without reserve, feeling without fear, and she died surrounded by love because she was never afraid to give it first. He looked directly at Evelyn among the small crowd of mourners. "I almost made the mistake of my life thinking that being successful meant being invulnerable. My aunt reminded me, through her example until the end, that true wealth is not in what you accumulate, but in how much you love and are loved. Thank you, Aunt Martha, for teaching me that before it was too late." After the funeral, Robert's mother hugged him tightly. "I am proud of you, son. Not because of your company or your money. I am proud of the man you are becoming." On the way back to New York on the night train, Evelyn and Robert shared a private compartment. She had brought the project she had had to postpone and was working under the small reading light while Robert looked out the window at the lights of the towns passing in the darkness. "What are you thinking about?" she asked without looking up from her blueprints. "That you almost weren't here with me," he replied. "That if I had arrived home 10 minutes later that night, you would have signed the papers, and I would have gone to Miami alone. I would have cried alone. I would have returned alone to an empty house." Evelyn put down her blueprints and sat next to him. "But you weren't late, and I was there, and I was in Miami with you, and we are returning home together. Why did you give me another chance?" he asked, a question he had wanted to ask for months. "After 15 years of neglect, after all the pain I caused you, why?" Evelyn looked out the window, contemplating her reflection in the dark glass. "Because I saw something in your eyes that night, when Lola pulled you out of the pantry and you walked into the living room where Dr. Harrison was. I saw genuine terror, not fear of losing comfort or the status of being married, fear of losing me. And in 20 years together, it was the first time I had seen that fear. That told me that maybe, just maybe, you had finally woken up." "I woke up," he confirmed. "And every day I keep waking up, because now I know that staying awake requires conscious daily effort." They kissed softly, and then Evelyn returned to her blueprints, while Robert pulled out his journal. He wrote, "Today I allowed myself to mourn my aunt's death without shame." Evelyn held me. "I finally understand that shared vulnerability doesn't weaken love, it deepens it." 6 months after Aunt Martha's death, on a rainy April afternoon, Lola received an unexpected call. It was her daughter Carol, whom she hadn't seen in 2 years due to a fight about Lola's deceased husband. "Mum," Carol said with a trembling voice, "I need to talk to you." They met at a cafe near Lola's office. Carol was 32, dark hair like her mother, and the same expressive eyes that could convey Volumes without words. "I'm making your same mistake," Carol said without preamble after ordering coffee. "Paul gave me an ultimatum. Change or he leaves. And I don't know how to change." Lola felt a sharp pain in her chest. Her daughter was repeating her story. "What is happening?" she asked gently. Carol started talking, and the words came out like a torrent held back for too long. How she had prioritized her career as a lawyer over her 7-year marriage. How she had cancelled countless romantic dinners for urgent cases. How she had stopped truly listening to Paul when he talked about his dreams of being a professor. "Sounds familiar," Lola said sadly. "Too familiar." "That's why I came to you," Carol admitted. "Because you went through this, because you lost Dad because of the same mistake, and I don't want to end up like you, Mom. Alone and regretful." The words hurt, but Lola knew they were true. "Then don't," she said firmly. "Don't make my mistake. I let pride destroy my marriage, but you still have time." She told her the complete story of Robert and Evelyn, of how she had intervened that fateful night, of how she had seen her own tragedy reflected in another couple and had had the courage to act. "I saved their marriage because I couldn't save mine," Lola explained. "But you can save yours. The question is, are you willing to make real changes, not just empty promises?" Carol cried openly in the cafe, oblivious to the curious glances of other customers. "I don't know how, I've been like this for so long." "Then let me help you," Lola offered, "like I wish someone had helped me." Over the following weeks, Lola applied everything she had learned working with Robert, Evelyn, and the company's employees. She coordinated therapy sessions for Carol and Paul, taught them communication exercises, showed them how to set healthy boundaries between work and personal life. One night, Lola invited Carol, Paul, Robert, and Evelyn to dinner at her small apartment. It was the first time she had brought everyone together, and she was nervous. "I want you to meet the people I saved," she told her daughter, "and I want them to meet the person I am now trying to save." The dinner was revealing. Robert and Paul discovered that they shared similar patterns. Both had used work as an escape from emotional intimacy. Evelyn and Carol identified with each other in their experiences of feeling invisible in their own marriages. "The difference," Evelyn observed, "is that you are facing this at 7 years. It took us 15 to realize. And we almost didn't make it in time," Robert added. Paul, a quiet man of 34 with glasses and a shy smile, spoke for the first time that night about his pain. "The hardest thing wasn't feeling lonely. It was feeling lonely while being married. I would wait for Carol to come home, and when she finally arrived, she wasn't really there anymore. Her body was, but her mind was still at work on the next case, on the next meeting." Carol took his hand, crying. "I'm so sorry, I didn't realize how much I was hurting you. Now you know," Lola said softly. "And knowing is the first step. The second is acting consistently on that knowledge." After dinner, while Evelyn helped Lola with the dishes, they spoke quietly in the kitchen. "You are saving your daughter from your own fate," Evelyn observed. "It must feel redemptive." "It feels terrifying," Lola admitted. "What if I fail? What if Carol ends up like me anyway?" "Then you will have done everything you could," Evelyn replied with hard-won wisdom. "We cannot control the decisions of others. We can only offer our experience and hope it is enough." 2 months later, Carol implemented drastic changes at her law firm. She turned down a promotion that would require more hours, established a strict boundary of no work after 7 in the evening, and began religiously attending couples therapy with Paul. In a particularly emotional session with her therapist, Carol finally understood the root of her work addiction. "My father died when I was 18, she explained, "and I saw how my mother fell apart. She was left with nothing. No husband, no savings, no identity of her own. I swore I would never be so dependent on anyone, that I would always be self-sufficient. But in the process of protecting myself from dependence, I became incapable of healthy interdependence." Paul listened with tears in his eyes. "I don't want you to be dependent," he said. "I want us to be a team, to support each other, to share life, not just space." That revelation fundamentally changed something in Carol. She began to see her marriage not as a threat to her autonomy, but as a source of complementary strength. Lola observed her daughter's progress with a mixture of joy and nostalgic pain. Every victory for Carol was a reminder of what she herself had lost. But it was also proof that mistakes don't have to be repeated eternally. One afternoon, Carol unexpectedly showed up at Lola's office with an envelope. "What is this?" Lola asked. "Open it." Inside was an invitation to a vow renewal ceremony for Carol and Paul. "We want to renew our vows," Carol explained. "To do it right this time, with full awareness of what it means. And we want you to officiate the ceremony." Lola was speechless. "Mom, you saved my marriage, not with empty advice, but by sharing your deepest wounds with me, by showing me your pain so I wouldn't have to feel mine alone. You are the most appropriate person to guide us in this new beginning." The ceremony took place on a sunny Saturday in June, in a small garden by the sea near where Aunt Martha had lived. 20 people attended, close family, intimate friends, and of course, Robert and Evelyn. Lola, dressed in an elegant navy blue suit, stood in front of Carol and Paul with a text she had carefully written. "Marriage is not a static state. It is a verb, something we actively do every day." Carol and Paul stand here today not to promise eternal love, because love without action is just feeling. They promise active presence, conscious listening, brave vulnerability, and the commitment to repeatedly choose each other, even on the difficult days. Her voice broke slightly. "I couldn't do those things in my own marriage. I let pride, fear, and stubbornness destroy something beautiful. But by sharing my failure, I have found a purpose: to help others not make my mistakes. And today, seeing my daughter renew her vows with full awareness and commitment is the greatest redemption I could hope for." There wasn't a dry eye in the garden. Even Robert, the successful businessman who had learned to embrace his sensitivity, cried openly. After the ceremony, during the small banquet, Robert approached Lola. "You know," he said, "when I hired you 3 years ago, I thought I was hiring a housekeeper. I had no idea I was inviting the person who would save my life into my home." Lola smiled with moist eyes. "And I thought I was taking a cleaning job. I didn't know I was entering the story that would finally give meaning to my loss." They hugged, two people whose lives had intertwined in the most unexpected and significant way. A year after Carol's vow renewal, Robert organized a special event at the company. It was the anniversary of the implementation of the family wellness programs, and the results had exceeded all expectations. Employee turnover had decreased by 70%. Productivity, contrary to initial fears, had increased by 30%. But more important than the statistics, personal stories abounded. Marriages saved, father-child relationships restored, employees who rediscovered abandoned passions. The auditorium was full when Robert stepped onto the stage, but this time he didn't come alone. Evelyn was by his side, now graduated with honors from her architecture program and working on her first major commission, redesigning the company's communal spaces to foster human connection. 2 years ago, Robert began, I was minutes away from losing everything, not due to bankruptcy or business crisis, but due to something much simpler and more devastating: neglect. Neglect toward the person I loved the most. Lola was in the front row next to Carol and Paul, who now taught literature at a school and wrote his first novel in the evenings. But someone had the courage to stop me, to literally pull me back from the cliff. Lola Rodriguez, our family wellness coordinator, saved me that night because she had lived the story I was about to repeat. He projected a photograph of Lola and her deceased husband, taken 30 years ago, onto the large screen. They were young, radiant, clearly in love. This man died without knowing his wife loved him. He died believing that she preferred pride to his presence, and Lola has lived with that remorse every day since. But instead of letting the guilt consume her, she transformed it into a mission to make sure others don't make her same mistake. Lola discreetly wiped her tears as the audience watched her with deep respect. Thanks to her courage, Robert continued, my wife and I not only saved our marriage, we rebuilt it from a stronger foundation. Evelyn returned to chasing her dreams. I learned that success without love is just empty noise, and together we created something that I hope will be our true legacy. Evelyn took the microphone, something they had planned together. For 15 years, I was invisible in my own marriage, she said with a clear, firm voice. Not because my husband was cruel, but because we both forgot that love requires constant attention. Like plants, it withers without care. Today I am here not as the wife of, but as myself. Architect, eternal student, woman who rediscovered her voice. And that was only possible because someone refused to let us give up. The auditorium erupted in applause. Lola stood up, overwhelmed by the public recognition of something she had considered simply her human duty. Robert raised his hand for silence. Therefore, starting today, we are establishing the Martha Rodriguez Fund, he announced, using the name of the aunt who had taught him about vulnerability and Lola's maiden name. A $1 million fund dedicated to free couples therapy, communication workshops, and support for families in crisis. Because if there's one thing these 2 years have taught me, it's that saving families is the most profitable investment there is. The ovation was deafening, but Robert wasn't finished. And Lola Rodriguez, who started as a housekeeper with a modest salary, will be the executive director of this fund, with full autonomy and the necessary resources to help hundreds of families, because no one understands the price of silence better than someone who paid it. Lola stepped onto the stage, trembling. She looked out at the audience of 200 people and had to take several deep breaths before she could speak. 30 years ago, she began with a broken voice. I told my husband in the middle of a silly argument, "If you're not happy, there's the door." And he walked through it. And he never came back. He died 2 years later, without me being able to tell him I'd been a proud idiot, without being able to tell him I loved him more than I loved being right. She wiped her tears without shame. I lived 26 years with that remorse. 26 years wondering, what if I had swallowed my pride? What if I had run after him? What if I had chosen love over stubbornness? Those questions tormented me every night. She looked directly at Carol, who was crying in the front row. But 2 years ago, I saw those same questions reflected in Evelyn's eyes, and something in me broke. I couldn't stay silent. I couldn't allow another woman to live with my same remorse. So I broke all the rules of professionalism and dragged my boss into a pantry to scream truths at him that no one else dared to say. Wet laughter filled the auditorium. And in doing so, I discovered something. My pain was not in vain. My loss was not without purpose, because by sharing my deepest wound, I could prevent others from bleeding the same way. That is the only redemption we can hope for from our mistakes, that they serve to light the way for others. She pointed to Robert and Evelyn. They gave me a job, but more importantly, they gave me a purpose. They transformed my biggest failure into my most meaningful mission. And now, with this fund, we can multiply that impact 1,000 times. The ovation lasted 3 full minutes. Employees who had been helped by Lola's programs stood up. Some briefly shared their own stories. The engineer who had been on the verge of divorce, but now renewed his vows every year. The accountant who had recovered the relationship with her teenage children. The manager who had learned that crying didn't make him weak, but human. After the event, when the auditorium emptied, the 6 remained. Robert, Evelyn, Lola, Carol, Paul, and surprisingly Eleanor, Robert's mother, who had traveled from Miami for the occasion. They gathered on the company terrace, a space Evelyn had redesigned with vertical gardens and comfortable seating that invited genuine conversation instead of rushed meetings. "You know, son," Eleanor said as the sun began to set over New York City, "your father would be proud. Not of the empire you built, although that is impressive. He would be proud of the man you allowed yourself to become." Robert hugged his mother, something that before would have seemed too sentimental for a semi-professional context. "I wish he were here to see it." "He is," Eleanor said with conviction. "In every moment you choose vulnerability over control. In every time you prioritize Evelyn over a meeting. He always knew what really mattered. It just took you time to learn it." Carol approached Lola and hugged her. "Mom, did you ever forgive Dad? For leaving, for not fighting harder, for giving up so easily?" Lola thought carefully. "It took years, many years filled with anger and resentment, but eventually I understood that he was also hurt, that my pride had deeply wounded him, and his way of protecting himself was to leave. We both made mistakes. The difference is that I had to live with them and he didn't." "And did you forgive yourself?" Paul asked softly. Lola looked out at the horizon, where the Atlantic Ocean shone golden under the setting sun. "I am learning. Every family I help, every marriage that is saved, is a step towards self-forgiveness. I cannot change my past, but I can make sure my pain has meaning. And that, I discovered, is enough. Evelyn stood up and proposed a toast. They had brought a bottle of sparkling cider that they had been saving. To second chances, she said, raising her glass. To the courage to speak uncomfortable truths. To the love that survives neglect and flourishes stronger. And to Lola, who taught us that sometimes the least expected person is the one who saves your life. To Lola, everyone repeated in unison. They drank as the sky was tinged with oranges and pinks. New York stretched out before them, a city of intertwined history and future, much like the lives that had met in that house 2 years ago. "Can I say something cheesy?" Robert asked suddenly. "Please," Evelyn laughed. "You've earned the right to cheesiness after 15 years of emotional repression." "I was thinking about that moment in the pantry," Robert said, looking at Lola. "When you grabbed me and said, 'Shut up, come with me fast.' In that moment, I thought my life was falling apart. Now I realize it was the opposite. It was my life truly beginning." He turned to Evelyn. "I built an empire of $42 million. I closed international contracts. I appeared on magazine covers. And nothing, absolutely nothing, compares to the privilege of seeing you every morning and knowing you chose to stay, that you chose to rebuild with me." Evelyn wiped the tears that ran freely. "And I spent 15 years feeling invisible, preparing dinners no one ate, waiting for someone who never arrived. I was ready to give up. But then a small woman with the strength of a titan appeared, who literally dragged you into a pantry and gave me back my marriage. And now I'm living a life I didn't even know was possible." Paul, who had remained mostly silent during the evening, finally spoke. "Carol and I were sitting exactly where you are a year ago, on the edge of the cliff, and you showed us that it was possible to step back, that we didn't have to jump, that there was another option. The option is always love," Eleanor said with the wisdom of her 72 years. "Not the fairy tale love that never requires work, but the love that chooses to stay even when it's difficult. The love that says, 'I choose you today every morning,' not because it's easy, but because it's worth it." A contemplative silence fell as each person processed those words. The sky was now deep purple, and the first stars were beginning to appear. "There's something I never told you," Lola said suddenly, "about that night." Everyone looked at her attentively. "When I heard Robert put the key in the door, my first instinct was to hide in the kitchen, to let him enter normally. It wasn't my place to intervene. But then I remembered something my husband told me the last time I saw him. He said, 'Lola, the problem isn't that we argue. The problem is that we never really listen to each other. We just wait for our turn to talk.'" Her voice broke. And he was right. If someone had intervened that night, if someone had pulled me into a pantry and forced me to truly listen, maybe he wouldn't have walked through that door. Maybe he would be here today. So when I heard that key turning, I decided to be for you what no one was for me." Robert stood up and hugged Lola tightly. "You were our guardian angel, literally." "No," Lola corrected. "I was just someone who learned from her mistakes well enough to recognize them in others. That's all the wisdom I have, the ability to see my own tragedy reflected in the eyes of others and shout 'stop' before it's too late." Carol hugged her mother on the other side, and soon everyone was in a group hug, 6 people whose destinies had intertwined in the most improbable and beautiful way. When they finally separated, Evelyn noticed something. "Look!" She pointed toward the office building behind them. Through the illuminated windows, they could see straggling employees, some working but many simply conversing, laughing, sharing human moments instead of just mechanical productivity. "That's what we changed," Evelyn said. "We didn't just save one marriage. We changed the whole culture. We proved it's possible to be successful without sacrificing your humanity. It's the true legacy," Robert added, "more lasting than any contract or profit figure." Eleanor prepared to leave. She had a train to catch back to Miami. "Before I go, I want to say something to all of you," she announced. "I have lived 72 years. I have seen a lot. And what I learned is this: life is not measured in years. It is measured in moments of real connection, in conversations that touch the soul, in shared tears and genuine laughter, in hands held during storms." She looked each of them in the eye. "You 6 are rich, not because of money, although some of you have it. You are rich because you chose love over pride, vulnerability over control, connection over convenience, and no one can take that wealth away from you." She left, leaving a deep and meaningful silence. Night had completely fallen. New York City shone with 1,000 lights, and on that terrace, 6 people who had been broken in different ways remained together, whole not by having avoided the pain, but by having gone through it together. "You know what the irony is?" Robert said after a long silence. "I spent years chasing success. I traveled the world, closed multi-million-dollar contracts, built an empire, and the real happiness was waiting for me at home all along. I just had to stop long enough to see it." "You wouldn't have appreciated it without the journey," Lola observed wisely. "Sometimes we need to get completely lost to truly value what we find when we come home." Evelyn leaned her head on Robert's shoulder, a simple gesture that would have been impossible before because he was never present enough to lean on. "I propose something," she said. "That we meet here on this terrace every year on this date, all 6 of us, no matter where we are or what we are doing, to remind each other why we chose love over work, presence over productivity, humanity over ambition." "It's a pact," Carol agreed immediately. "An annual reminder of what really matters," Paul added. "I like it," Lola said, "because it's easy to forget. It's easy to go back to old patterns. We need anchors to remind us who we decided to be." They sealed the pact with a final toast, and as the glasses clinked, each one silently reflected on the journey that had brought them to that moment. Robert thought of the man he had been 2 years ago, obsessed with contracts, blind to his wife's loneliness, building walls instead of bridges. And he thanked the woman who had stopped him on the threshold of losing everything. Evelyn remembered the endless nights waiting for someone who never arrived, the feeling of becoming invisible in her own life, the moment. She decided she deserved more, and she was thankful for having the courage to go all the way to the edge of divorce, because only there, on that cliff, did they find the motivation to truly change. Lola relived that crucial night when she heard the key in the door and made the decision to intervene, knowing it could cost her her job, but also knowing she couldn't live with another regret. And she was thankful that her pain had not been in vain, that her loss had served to prevent the loss of others. Carol reflected on how close she had come to repeating her mother's tragedy of letting pride and ambition destroy her marriage, and she was thankful for having a mother with the courage to share her worst mistakes to light her daughter's path. Paul thought of the years when he felt like a second choice, always waiting for crumbs of attention from a career-obsessed wife, and he was thankful for not having walked out the door when he had the chance, but instead having given love one last opportunity. And Eleanor, already in her taxi to the station, thought of her late husband, how he had been an emotionally present man in a time that didn't value it, and how her son had finally inherited that gift after almost losing it. On the terrace, as the night enveloped New York, the 6 remained together for a while longer, savoring the silent company, that wordless communion that only exists between people who have shared genuine vulnerability. "It's late," Lola finally said. "And tomorrow is Monday. Some of us have to work." Soft laughter filled the terrace. "Yes, but only 8 hours," Robert joked. "We have strict policies about that now." They stood up slowly, reluctant to end the evening. They hugged once more, each hug a silent promise to continue choosing connection over convenience. Robert and Evelyn were the last to leave. As they walked toward their car, he took her hand. "Happy?" he asked. "Whole," she replied. "Which is better than happy. Happiness comes and goes. Wholeness remains." They drove home in comfortable silence, the kind of silence that can only exist between 2 people who no longer need to fill every moment with words. Upon arriving at their apartment, the same one where almost everything ended 2 years ago, they stopped at the door. "Remember," Evelyn asked, "this is where Lola yanked you inside." "How could I forget?" Robert replied. "It was the night I died and was reborn simultaneously." They entered together. The house smelled of lemon and lavender, Lola's characteristic scent that remained even now that she no longer worked there as a housekeeper, but as a fund executive. They went up the stairs together, something so simple that before would have been impossible, because Robert always arrived when Evelyn was already asleep. In the bedroom, as they prepared for bed, Robert noticed something. On Evelyn's nightstand, under a small lamp, was the divorce paper she had ripped up that crucial night. The pieces had been carefully taped, back together and framed. "Why did you keep that?" he asked, surprised. Evelyn looked at the frame with a melancholic smile. "To remember. To remember that we were inches from losing everything. To remember that love is not enough without action. To remember that every day we have to choose to continue, not out of inertia but by conscious decision. Robert hugged her from behind, resting his chin on her shoulder. "I keep something too," he confessed. He went to his desk and pulled out a small, folded piece of paper. It was the note Lola had left that night in the pantry. "Listen, just listen. I carry it in my wallet every day," he said with an emotional voice, "to remember that sometimes the most important words are the ones we don't say, but the ones we allow others to say." They looked at themselves in the bedroom mirror, two people who had traveled to hell and back together, marked but not broken, wounded but healing. "Do you know what the most extraordinary thing about all this is?" Evelyn asked, turning to face him. "That we almost lost everything to finally find everything." Robert nodded, unable to speak due to emotion. They lay down together, intertwining their hands as they did now every night. Before turning off the light, Robert said softly, "Thank you for not signing those papers. Thank you for finally coming home," she replied. And in the comfortable darkness of their room, while New York slept outside, two people who had been lost found each other again. Not in perfection, but in daily effort. Not in grand promises, but in small, consistent gestures. Not in avoiding pain, but in going through it together. Because in the end, they discovered that true love is not never failing. It is getting up every time you fall, reaching out even when it hurts, and choosing to stay when it would be easier to leave. And it all began with 3 urgent words whispered in a hallway. "Shut up. Come with me fast." 3 words that saved 3 lives and changed countless others. 3 words that proved that sometimes the greatest act of love is refusing to stay silent when silence destroys. Because being on the edge of the abyss taught them to value solid ground, and walking back from that edge required more courage than any multi-million-dollar contract or professional title could ever bestow.